The Origin of Christianity by C.S. Lewis. In all developed religion, we find three strands or elements, and in Christianity one more. The first of these is what Professor Otto calls the experience of the numinous. Those who have not met this term may be introduced to it by the following device. Suppose you were told that there was a tiger in the next room. You would know that you were in danger and would probably feel fear. But if you were told there is a ghost in the next room and believed it, you would feel indeed what is often called fear, but of a different kind. It would not be based on the knowledge of danger, for no one is primarily afraid of what a ghost may do to him, but of the mere fact that it is a ghost. It is uncanny rather than dangerous, and the special kind of fear it excites may be called dread. With the uncanny, one has reached the fringes of the numinous. Now suppose you were told simply, there is a mighty spirit in the room, and believed it. Your feelings would be even less like the mere fear of danger, but the disturbance would be profound. You would feel wonder and a certain shrinking, a sense of inadequacy to cope with such a visitant and of prostration before it, an emotion which might be expressed in Shakespeare's words, "Under it my genius is rebuked." This feeling may be described as awe, and the object which excites it as the numinous. Now nothing is more certain than that man, from a very early period, began to believe that the universe was haunted by spirits. Professor Otto perhaps assumes too easily that from the very first such spirits were regarded with numinous awe. This is impossible to prove for the very good reason that utterances expressing awe of the numinous and utterances expressing mere fear of danger may use identical language, as we can still say that we are afraid of a ghost or afraid of a rise in prices. It is therefore theoretically possible that there was a time when men regarded these spirits simply as dangerous and felt towards them just as they felt towards tigers. What is certain is that now, at any rate, the numinous experience exists, and that if we start from ourselves we can trace it a long way back. A modern example may be found, if we are not too proud to seek it there, in The Wind in the Willows, where Rat and Mole approach Pan on the island. "Rat," he found breath to whisper, shaking, "are you afraid?" "Afraid?" murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid? Of him? Oh, never, never! And yet, O Mole, I am afraid." Going back about a century, we find copious examples in Wordsworth, perhaps the finest being that passage in the first book of the Prelude, where he describes his experience while rowing on the lake in the stolen boat. Going back further, we get a very pure and strong example in Malory, when Galahad began to tremble right hard when the deadly equals mortal flesh began to behold the spiritual things. In pagan literature, we find Ovid's picture of the dark grove on the Aventine, of which you would say at a glance, numen inest, the place is haunted, or there is a presence here, and Virgil gives us the palace of Latinus, awful, horrendum, with woods and sanctity, religione of elder days. A Greek fragment, attributed but improbably to Aeschylus, tells us of earth and sea and mountain shaking beneath the dread eye of their master. And far further back, Ezekiel tells us of the rings in his theophany, and they were so high that they were dreadful. And Jacob, rising from sleep, says, "How dreadful is this place!" We do not know how far back in human history this feeling goes. The earliest men almost certainly believed in things which would excite the feeling in us if we believed in them, and it seems therefore probable that numinous awe is as old as humanity itself. But our main concern is not with its dates. The important thing is that somehow or other it has come into existence, and is widespread, and does not disappear from the mind with the growth of knowledge and civilization. Now this awe is not a result of an inference from the visible universe. There is no possibility of arguing from mere danger to the uncanny, still less to the fully numinous. You may say that it seems to you very natural that early man, being surrounded by real dangers and therefore frightened, should invent the uncanny and the numinous. In a sense it is, but let us understand what we mean. You feel it to be natural because, sharing human nature with your remote ancestors, you can imagine yourself reacting to perilous solitudes in the same way. And this reaction is indeed natural in the sense of being in accord with human nature. But it is not in the least natural in the sense that the idea of the uncanny or of the numinous is already contained in the idea of the dangerous, or that any perception of danger or any dislike of the wounds and death which it may entail could give the slightest conception of ghostly dread or numinous awe to an intelligence which did not already understand them. When a man passes from physical fear to dread and awe, he makes a sheer jump and apprehends something which could never be given, as danger is, by the physical facts and the logical deductions from them. Most attempts to explain the numinous presuppose the thing to be explained, as when anthropologists derive it from fear of the dead, without explaining why dead men, assuredly the least dangerous kind of men, should have attracted this peculiar feeling. Against all such attempts, we must insist that dread and awe are in a different dimension from fear. They are in the nature of an interpretation man gives to the universe, or an impression he gets from it, and just as no enumeration of the physical qualities of a beautiful object could ever include its beauty, or give the faintest hint of what we mean by beauty to a creature without aesthetic experience, so no factual description of any human environment could include the uncanny and the numinous, or even hint at them. There seems to be, in fact, only two views we can hold about awe. Either it is a mere twist of the human mind, corresponding to nothing objective and serving no biological function, yet showing no tendency to disappear from that mind at its fullest development in poet, philosopher, or saint, or else it is a direct experience of the really supernatural, to which the name revelation might properly be given. The numinous is not the same as the morally good, and a man overwhelmed with awe is likely, if left to himself, to think the numinous object beyond good or evil. This brings us to the second strand or element in religion. All the human beings that history has heard of acknowledge some kind of morality. That is, they feel towards certain proposed actions the experiences expressed by the words "I ought" or "I ought not." These experiences resemble awe in one respect, namely that they cannot be logically deduced from the environment and the physical experiences of the man who undergoes them. You can shuffle "I want" and "I am forced" and "I shall be well advised" and "I dare not," as long as you please, without getting out of them the slightest hint of ought and ought not. And once again, attempts to resolve the moral experience into something else always presuppose the very thing they are trying to explain, as when a famous psychoanalyst deduces it from prehistoric parricide. If the parricide produced a sense of guilt, that was because men felt they ought not to have committed it. If they did not so feel, it could produce no sense of guilt. Morality, like numinous awe, is a jump. In it, man goes beyond anything that can be given in the facts of experience. And it has one characteristic too remarkable to be ignored. The moralities accepted among men may differ, though not at bottom so widely as is often claimed, but they all agree in prescribing a behaviour which their adherents fail to practice. All men alike stand condemned, not by alien codes of ethics, but by their own, and all men therefore are conscious of guilt. The second element in religion is the consciousness not merely of a moral law, but of a moral law at once approved and disobeyed. This consciousness is neither a logical nor an illogical inference from the facts of experience. If we did not bring it to our experience, we could not find it there. It is either inexplicable illusion or else revelation. The moral experience and the numinous experience are so far from being the same that they may exist for quite long periods without establishing a mutual contact. In many forms of paganism, the worship of the gods, and the ethical discussions of the philosophers had very little to do with each other. The third stage in religious development arises when men identify them, when the numinous power to which they feel awe is made the guardian of the morality to which they feel obligation. Once again, this may seem to you very natural. What could be more natural than for a savage, haunted at once by awe and by guilt, to think the power which awes him is also the authority which condemns his guilt? And it is, indeed, natural to humanity, but it is not in the least obvious. The actual behaviour of that universe which the numinous haunts bears no resemblance to the behaviour which morality demands of us. The one seems wasteful, ruthless, and unjust. The other enjoins upon us the opposite qualities. Nor can the identification of the two be explained as wish fulfillment, for it fulfills no one's wishes. We desire nothing less than to see that law, whose naked authority is already unsupportable, armed with the incalculable claims of the numinous. Of all the jumps that humanity takes in its religious history, this is certainly the most surprising. It is not unnatural that many sections of the human race refused it. Non-moral religion and non-religious morality existed and still exist. Perhaps only a single people, as a people, took the new step with perfect decision. I mean the Jews. But great individuals in all times and places have taken it also, and only those who take it are safe from the obscenities and barbarities of unmoralized worship, or the cold, sad self-righteousness of sheer moralism. Judged by its fruits, this step is a step towards increased health. And though logic does not compel us to take it, it is very hard to resist. Even on paganism and pantheism, morality is always breaking in. And even Stoicism finds itself willy-nilly bowing the knee to God. Once more, it may be a madness congenital to man and oddly fortunate in its results, or it may be revelation. And if revelation, then it is most really and truly in Abraham that all the peoples shall be blessed. For it was the Jews who fully and unambiguously identified the awful presence haunting black mountaintops and thunderclouds with the righteous Lord, who loveth righteousness. The fourth strand or element is a historical event. There was a man born among these Jews who claimed to be, or to be the son of, or to be one with, the something which is at once the awful haunter of nature and the giver of the moral law. The claim is so shocking, a paradox, and even a horror which we may easily be lulled into taking too lightly, that only two views of this man are possible. Either he was a raving lunatic of an unusually abominable type, or else he was and is precisely what he said. There is no middle way. If the records make the first hypothesis unacceptable, you must submit to the second. And if you do that, all else that is claimed by Christians becomes credible, that this man, having been killed, was yet alive, and that his death, in some manner incomprehensible to human thought, has effected a real change in our relations to the awful and righteous Lord, and a change in our favour. Why the assurance that ultimate reality is righteous and loving seems to me good, I have more or less indicated. It does not amount to logical compulsion. At every stage of religious development, man may rebel, if not without violence to his own nature, yet without absurdity. He can close his spiritual eyes against the numinous, if he is prepared to part company with half the great poets and prophets of his race, with his own childhood, with the richness and depth of uninhibited experience. He can regard the moral law as an illusion, and so cut himself off from the common ground of humanity. He can refuse to identify the numinous with the righteous, and remain a barbarian, worshipping sexuality, or the dead, or the life force, or the future. But the cost is heavy. And when we come to the last step of all, the historical incarnation, the assurance is strongest of all. The story is strangely like many myths which have haunted religion from the first, and yet it is not like them. It is not transparent to the reason. We could not have invented it ourselves. It has not the suspicious a priori lucidity of pantheism or of Newtonian physics. It has the seemingly arbitrary and idiosyncratic character which modern science is slowly teaching us to put up with in this willful universe, where irreversible entropy gives time a real direction, and the cosmos, no longer static or cyclic, moves like a drama from a real beginning to a real end. If any message from the core of reality ever were to reach us, we should expect to find in it just that unexpectedness, that willful, dramatic anfractuosity which we find in the Christian faith. It has the master touch, the rough, male taste of reality, not made by us or indeed for us, but hitting us in the face.